panel and write about cybersecurity at Politico. In particular, I am the author of the morning cybersecurity newsletter.
That already is changing in 2018 is the digitization of major sporting events. So you're finding incorporation of technology not just in the stadiums, but in the ways that different events are scored, in how you process your payments, in every aspect of the Olympic Games. And what hasn't necessarily been thought through is what happens if something goes wrong. So one of our biggest fears, for instance, is that digital scoring systems, a good example in tennis is the Hawkeye technology that determines whether the ball is in or out of a tennis match. And if you were watching the Australian Open, you probably saw this technology used. Well, what if somebody could hack that technology to favor Roger Federer just slightly over the other competitor? Now, what if you think about that technology being incorporated into hockey? You think about automatic scoring systems being incorporated in all sorts of Olympic disciplines. And so it's important both because it could really affect the integrity of the games, but it could also be a microcosm for digitization in our broader society and how we're not necessarily thinking through all the security implications when we decide to adopt the next shiny new thing.
Right. Question for Jeanette. The Department of Homeland Security has 2 open binding operational directives, one on removing Kaspersky Lab software from federal networks and another on anti-email spoofing and other security measures in federal agencies. What updates can you give us on progress on those?
I got the softball, huh?
I was going to say, we also help support the Olympics.
By the way, if these individual questions I'm asking everybody, if you want to jump in, by all means, if you want to say something on that.
No, it's okay. So actually, all of our binding operational directives can remain open. And so we've published some of them. We're going to ensure that all of them are public very soon. But I've kind of talked to everything from the very first one, which was about critical vulnerability patching, and to dealing with some updates to infrastructure vulnerabilities. Then we did have the Kaspersky Lab and the DMARC and a couple of others. So just for those of you who are less familiar with this, before I answer this, or don't answer this specific question, when the binding operational directives is a relatively new authority that we were given by Congress a couple of years ago, and generally, DHS is in a role of advisor, service provider, capability provider to federal agencies for their cybersecurity. And what this provided was kind of an additional authority where we could actually direct agencies to take certain actions. And we wanted to be very careful about how we use this authority. And so we thought about, what are the principles that we want to put in place? And one of the immediate principles that we came to was we had to have an ability to measure progress. And for those of you who work in cybersecurity, that's always that's always tough. But we wanted to ensure that not only were we focusing on those activities that would have broad impact, that are scalable and a high priority, but that we could also have a way of independently validating progress on them. And so we've taken a lot of different, we've used that directive to tackle a lot of different challenges. On the Kaspersky one, I can tell you that we're making progress in alignment with the direction of the binding operational directive. The one that most people are focused on, when you referred to the anti-email spoofing, was implementing DMARC, which is an ability to sort of ensure that you've got the appropriate handshake, if you will, between email service provider and user, and that really assists with decreasing the number of ways that a user could spoof a government email. But what we also focused on was increasing web security in that one. So I'll say generally we have made a lot of progress there. With everything, agencies have some resourcing issues, but for the most part, they're really doing, I think, a great job. We're planning to be at about 96% compliance by the deadline of October, and we'll work with a couple of the small agencies.
Deadline of October?
For the full year, a full DMARC implementation. And then there's some other things like Start TLS and others that we'll continue to implement. The sort of overall, though, in addition to it just being good government security practices to ensure that our citizens can trust an email from, say, CBP or IRS to actually be an email from CBP or IRS. We also wanted to be very public, because I also believe that the federal government is part of this broader cyber ecosystem that we're trying to defend. And while email service providers, say in the case of DMARC, had been doing a great deal of work in implementing that, we wanted to ensure and to signal that we believed it was appropriate for us as an enterprise and as email users to also take that step. And DMARC is unique in that you need both of those entities. So we sort of think about these binding operational directives as not only guidance to agencies, but also signaling that we believe that these are important steps for the entire ecosystem to take, and that we are also a responsible and accountable member of that ecosystem.
Now, Evelyn, you've been, Commerce and DHS have been working together on a botnet report, on a plan on how to combat those, and just released a version of it. Most of the industry feedback I've seen has been positive, but I'm wondering if it's been early enough or late enough that you've gotten feedback that suggests where you might go before the report is finalized in May, areas that might see changes.
Thanks, Tim, and just thank you to State of the Net for having me here today, and I'm really pleased to be here with all my panelists. We were just commenting that, seeing an all-female panel in the cybersecurity area is might be unprecedented. Very pleased I actually asked for the softball question, so no, but this is still a good one. Really, the botnet report. So let me just say about that. We just posted it at early January after a process that began in May of last year. We've been working very closely with DHS, the Department of Commerce, and all of the stakeholders in the cybersecurity community to get this done. And so we were very pleased coming out in January to receive such positive feedback. But it really is because of the open and transparent process that we used. We did a RFC to get comments from stakeholders on what direction we should go in this area of combating botnets, and then we held a workshop with the stakeholders as well to dive deep into what the issues really are and what we need to do collectively. What we found out, of course, is that there's no silver bullet here. We need to continue to partner and do our job across many different goal areas to make an impact here. So really where we are in terms of the process and in terms of Tim's question of getting feedback is that we have it out for comment again. We're asking stakeholders, now that we've set out these broad-based goals, and we have 6 of those, and some preliminary action steps, we really need to hear from the community on how we actually execute in this area. So not just what are our broad goals, but how do we actually implement? Because this problem is so important. We all know that the stakes are high. One thing that's been so positive about this is just the partnerships you're seeing within government. DHS and Commerce took this task very seriously. From the top of our agencies down, we said, how can we work seamlessly together to make this work? And we reached out to all of our interagency partners, not just the ones listed in the executive order, to involve them in the process as well. And so we really feel that the entire community can see their voice and has a voice in this. But what we need to hear next is, how can we phase these things? What are the priorities? What do we do first? Is there low-hanging fruit? And this is the feedback that we're looking to get from the current comment process. We're starting to get that in. We're having some great discussions with smaller groups so we can dig deep and say, how do we actually start building out the roadmap to get this done? But we're looking forward over the next couple of months to continue to get that feedback in. Comments on the report itself are due February 12th, and then we'll incorporate it and deliver to the President in May of this year.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Catherine, I know this time last year you were on a panel where there was a discussion about the GPS, the U.S. GPS hacking threat to the U.S. satellite system. I'm wondering if you've seen that evolve over that year, or if you have a sense of just what the general threat is to that satellite system right now.
I didn't get the softball question. So GPS. One, CenturyLink doesn't own any. Most people don't. But in my role, one of the things that I do, and it's not only for CenturyLink but the communications sector at large, is sort of look at potentially what are some of the vulnerabilities that might, wreak havoc on our ability to deliver services. And actually, the government has been a fabulous partner in being able to sort of bring to us issues for what I call the national sport of spoofing and jamming GPS signal. Now, given that spoofing and jamming of GPS signal is actually fairly easy, there's lots of tools you can get on eBay and stuff like that to do that. Please don't buy it, please. It came to us, certainly as CenturyLink and as a sector at large, to be able to sort of do an assessment. Well, does that mean that, if the satellite system does get spoofed and jammed, will you not be able to do whatever you're doing over our networks? And the good answer, and the good news is the answer is no. By and large, certainly the major carriers don't really rely on GPS per se. But just pause 1 second. Because people use GPS not so much on the transport, like, CenturyLink's backbone and stuff like that, but they use it for virtually every application, everything that you use. And I think most people think about GPS, in terms of Google Maps, well, because I couldn't get from here to there without Google Maps or Waze or whatever it is you use, which uses GPS. But the real hidden utility to this is the time of day. So the maps are important, but if I can get a map, it might be a little expensive to go out and buy one, but it's really the time of day, which becomes sort of if you will, the national vulnerability. And then when you ratchet that up a little bit further, and you realize that of all the nations on Earth, or major nations on Earth, we as a country are the most reliant on these kind of time of day and positioning kind of capabilities compared to other countries and other continents, well, then I can understand why government, in the paucity of concerns about things to be concerned about and maybe not sleep about at night, would bring those kind of issues to industry to do some sort of risk assessments. So here we are, as a nation, and it's not a good, bad, or indifferent, we have a GPS constellation which is older. It is subject to spoofing and jamming. And the alternate GPS constellations, I think from sort of a national security point of view, which are owned by China and Russia, under bad days or in an environment where we might not be in friendly environment, I can understand why the question is brought to us. Do I have a solution? No, but I'll work on seeing if we can create a solution.
Right. Valerie, one of your jobs at Accenture is advising the C-suite executives on cyber risks. We report different things all the time about polls and how much they are placing importance on it at that level, how much they get it. What is your experience firsthand with those executives on how much they get it and how much they're paying attention and care?
I would say I'm fortunate because in the financial services sector, they definitively are paying attention to it. And most of the conversation from a senior executive and a board member is, how do I know that I'm spending enough and on the right things? Because I just got to know that our name's not going to be in the paper. Can we make sure that's not going to happen? And it is at least the conversation is happening, right? In that sense. There's different levels of maturity in any sector, across the sector. Most people point to the financial services sector in this space as being the most mature. Without question, that's true in many respects. And I think that the pressures that financial institutions face from a loss of integrity that can happen and be cataclysmic to them sets a certain business driver that's immediate, that's different from other sectors. And so it does enable for a better conversation. Most of that conversation then, I try to pivot them away from am I spending enough and how do I know I'm spending on the right things, to having a real conversation about, let's talk about what's important to your business and the business drivers and have a risk management conversation so that the way in which you evaluate this, not just today, but in perpetuity, is not just, yep, check the box, I spent the right amount of money today, but a real conversation about how do I take this concept of remaining resilience in the face of what could be the worst case scenario for my institution all the way down to something I can withstand on a daily basis and ensure that every single person across my institution understands their exact role and accountability in that role at all times. And people talk, well, cyber is everybody's responsibility. Well, when it is everybody's responsibility, sometimes it could be no one's responsibility. And so when you sit there and think about accountability and where rubber meets the road, when we say that it's the senior management, there has to be a very clear defined metric as what their job is versus their direct reports. So the general counsel has a responsibility and their direct reports have a responsibility. That's different from the person who owns third-party relationship risk management. They have a very specific set of responsibilities in the space, but it won't be the same as the CFOs, for example. So where we've seen this to be successful in perpetuity, that's that whole governance conversation, and the senior management understands that when you start talking in those ways.
I'm going to throw it to this question to the entire panel, and it's kind of an on the other hand to what you just said, Valerie, in the sense that you talked about companies losing business or reputation as a result of a breach. On the other hand, the Equifax breach was one of the most disastrous of all time. Yes, the CEO did end up being pushed out somewhat because of it, but its stock bounced back very quickly. I just was reading that Intel stock is back up to a high for several years as of today, despite the fact that everyone kind of agrees that the Spectre and Meltdown flaws are borderline catastrophic. This suggests to some people that the market is not going to handle this. That's not good enough, that you can't just have a market-based approach and that the government hands-off approach will not work. How do each of you answer that?
I can start without having to decide from a government perspective. So at Berkeley, we're a center focused on the future of cybersecurity. And one of the things that we do is play out scenarios for the future. One of the scenarios we've played out is what happens when people continue to see these vulnerabilities over time and don't react very strongly. And that's what you're sort of seeing in the Equifax situation. The average consumer probably doesn't recognize what has happened or has seen it happen so many times that they've stopped caring. And part of the reason for that, though, is that the average consumer also hasn't faced any real losses as a result of any of these breaches. I mean, I myself have been involved in at least 5 breaches that I could name off the top of my head. Probably many of you were in the OPM breach and the Equifax breach. But at the end of the day, other than having to get your credit card sent to you a second time, there have been no real costs. So I don't know whether the answer is a market answer or a government answer, but I do think that there's an incentive structure problem where if the person is not facing any real costs, then the consumers are not going to respond needing anything. And so then the companies are able to continue to go forward as planned. We can decide as a society whether that's the outcome we want or not. But at the moment, I think that's the market failure that's leading to these outcomes.
So I have a little bit of a different take. Maybe because I've worked in a large institution, I've been a regulator, and I now work with many clients in this space. And I do believe it is a combination of things. I don't think we will get there without government involvement, and I don't think we will get there only without private sector involvement. But I want to say on the consumer front something very careful there when it comes to Equifax or when it comes to any of the large-scale, not only breaches, but for that matter, when they're infrastructure-level vulnerabilities. I think many of them really do know that it's not good and that they do feel pain and they are nervous. But I don't think they feel empowered on what to do about it. I can't say how many times in a day, a week, a month, a family member, policymaker, some really smart people come up to me and say, well, I want to tell everybody that we've got this, but I don't actually know what I as an individual can do because I didn't have a choice in that situation about what I was using or where was this going. So I'm going to look at an example, which is around the Internet of Things, where in 5 years, you're not going to have a choice about whether or not your washing machine communicates to the internet. Every washing machine that you go in and buy is going to communicate, right? Every appliance is going to communicate. You're not going to have a consumer choice in that. And how much visibility, how much transparency, how much control is a consumer going to have over where that information goes? Now let's take that and put it in a medical device. And who owns that information? And what it means to you as the end person who really needs that medical device implanted in your body. And I just think when it comes to the intersection of certain things, when it relates to government and the private sector, standards are probably a healthy place to go, particularly when lives are on the line.
Sure. So just a couple of things here. We definitely, if you look at the botnet report, you'll see that there are actually two areas that we emphasize here that need work. One is on education and awareness. There is this sense that we need to do more about getting the right information to the right people. And so that is actually one of the big goal areas that we're asking stakeholders to focus on and to give some additional information about where we want to go in this area. For NTIA itself, the transparency issue and giving more information to consumers, to buyers, to large enterprises so they can make smart security decisions is important to us. One thing that we've focused on in all of our cybersecurity work is this idea of building markets around security because of the fact that incentives are still misaligned, which is also one of the issues that we point out in the botnet report. One thing that we've been working on over the last several years is the issue of IoT patching. So, with these devices out there, as we saw with the Mirai botnet, sometimes many of them are deployed. Everyone is trying to get first to market, and security is often an afterthought. So we had stakeholders come together in one of our multi-stakeholder processes to look at, well, what can we do about actually communicating to buyers information about patching and upgradability so that they have more information where they can make a better buying choice where they can consider security. So our stakeholders came together and they basically came up with a very simple recommendation after bringing civil society, manufacturers, software providers together in a room and saying, okay, what consensus can we get to? They came up with 3 simple guidelines really as a starting point. 1, let consumers know if you're doing patching on your device. 2, if you are doing patching, let them know how they can take advantage of this, how it will work. And 3, let them know how long you're going to support it. So 3 simple things. Transparency is something that we've been trying to work on to make the market more aware. Under the area of IoT security where we're moving to next, again along this theme, is to look at software component transparency. So we've found in some incidents that many large manufacturers don't even know what is on their system, and sometimes they call their vendors and the vendors don't know. That happened in the WannaCry incident. We had heard that certain hospitals weren't even able to tell what was on their systems and so couldn't respond to the mitigation information that they were receiving. So where we hope to go to next, again, bring stakeholders together. Let's look at what we can do around this issue of software component transparency. So these are just some of the things that we're trying to do to get at that education and awareness gap that's in the marketplace.
I mean, I guess I would just kind of agree with sort of what previous panelists said. I do think that there's an issue with consumers. Is it because they've become so jaded or because they don't experience the cost? It's probably a combination of both. I think I am a big believer that I want the market to be able to solve some of these challenges. I also don't think government involvement means regulation necessarily. I think there's a lot of things that the government can do. A lot of what Evelyn was just sort of talking about, focusing our efforts on standards, industry-based standards. The government can assist with convening those entities together to talk about industry-based standards for IoT in particular. And sort of using our the various different mechanisms we have to talk about best practices or gaps and to raise awareness. But I do think that there is, and we've studied the subject now for a little while, is we don't exactly even know what the transparency gaps may be. We do see the same effects. You see the shareholder prices bouncing back in a lot of cases, so that would indicate that there's something that is, the shareholders are not seeing this as, or the stock market's not seeing this as something that they necessarily need to punish the company for long term. And I'm not suggesting that the company should be punished. don't want to take that out of context, but that's not how the market is reacting, and so what does that mean? How do you get consumers to drive companies towards more security conscious products? How do you get shareholders to drive more cybersecurity practices in the enterprise risk management process of those companies? So I think those are all things that I don't believe that there's a regulatory solution to that, but I do believe that the government and industry should work together to try to suss out what are these gaps, what is causing some of this behavior to not change, and how can we work together to address it? Because I don't see regulation as being able to be responsive and agile enough for a company to be able to manage cybersecurity risk.
Good. So I had 2 or 3 more questions I wanted to get to, but we're starting to run down on time already, and I wanted to leave some time for questions from the audience, so be thinking of your questions. I'll start with the harder of the two, I think, probably here. How complicit is the United States in the escalation of malicious behavior in cyberspace between Stuxnet, the leaked hacking tools, and resistance to international norms on cyber espionage? Yep, I knew they were going to jump at this one.
So as industry, on some level, how can one ever really ever know? And I know that in much of the work that we do with our government partners, and for that matter, any of our industry partners, there's always an interest in, well, who did it and who was the bad guy? And all I know as an ISP is it needs to get fixed. So irrespective of the complicit versus non-complicit, is it the bad guys, is it the hackers, is it the whatever? On some level, I don't care. All I know is that mischief is afoot, and it's wrecking my business, and it's ruining my customer experience, and it's making my customer's life miserable and enough. So I'm going to be focused more on not so much the drama of it and the soap opera of it, not that I'm not interested, but really trying to focus on, so what does one do to anticipate, stop, mitigate, respond, recover, how to avoid it, how to not have it happen in the first place. And that takes enough energy, very much. So you like the way I dodged that one for you? Okay.
I'll take it. I think one of the things that I've talked about with a lot of industry folks and partners is there's governments in general, to include the U.S. government, has interests in leveraging what we'll call cyberspace, for lack of a better term, to achieve its various missions, to protect its citizens, to ensure national security and public safety. And we also have an interest in ensuring that that very same infrastructure and the applications that ride over it are also safe and secure. That is complicated to ensure that those processes are worked together so that we're making an overall risk-based decision. And I think, for those of you who haven't read it, I would encourage you to read about the vulnerabilities equities process that Rob Joyce, our White House cybersecurity coordinator, worked very hard to get that declassified. And that provides a tremendous amount of insight and transparency into how the government is thinking about these sorts of choices. We can't just talk about cybersecurity over here and then talk about sort of other missions over here. They're using the same sort of infrastructure and the same capabilities. And so we believe that it's incumbent upon us, and particularly with DHS, is advocating for any potential collateral damage or any industry or other sort of non-represented components, if you will, in those discussions. And those are very thorough, thoughtful conversations. The government is not willy-nilly taking action that could harm another entity. It's a risk-based decision that can be very complicated. That being said, as the United States and other countries become more and more connected, more and more dependent, we have to continue to evolve these processes and continue to evolve how we think about certain actions. And we have to ensure and continue to ensure that any action that we decide to take for the benefit of our citizens is also weighed against the potential negative impact that it could have down the road or sort of immediately with any collateral damage. So I think it's important to talk about that, and I think it's important to ensure that we're not just talking about one aspect of what a government does, but we have a broad mission that largely includes protecting all of you in this room, and that sometimes that may be in tension with other actions that we're seeking to achieve.
That's a great answer, and I guess I'd just put a bow on it, which is to say, if anyone's complicit, we're all complicit. It wouldn't just be governments. It's companies that have built business models around these sorts of systems. It's consumers that have, said they want privacy on the one hand and then take actions to not pursue it on the other. But then I think Catherine's point is exactly right. I'm not sure it matters. If we want to look towards the future, let's figure out how to fix the problem, and the blame game is definitely a distraction to that. And I think there's not enough conversation about, regardless of who caused it, let's all get together and try to fix it.
All right, so let's do this last question real fast. If everybody could just keep it to like a minute, and we'll start on Valerie's end. The biggest threat that worries you, be it a nation-state actor or a kind of threat or who's being targeted, whatever it is that's worrying you the most, I want to hear from each of you.
Same things worry me since I probably was first, at Treasury, kind of read into the whole CNCI thing, and it's always been the same thing. Whether it's intentional or even unintentional, I'll call it the destructive attack that could undermine integrity. I'm specifically focused on financial services, but that could be on an underlying infrastructure of obviously telecommunications or the energy sector, which would kind of bring down all of it. And so that's always been the thing, and it doesn't have to be a direct one. It could just be on the supply chain. So that is the thing that worries me, that integrity event. So there's been so much focus on availability. In the financial service sector, there's been a lot of focus on availability, certainly post 9/11 and post major weather events, the continued focus on availability. But really, it's the integrity event that is hard to ever come back from.
I feel her pain. I think my biggest concern is recognizing that that is a threat, is that we collectively, and I mean as a nation, as industry, as sectors, whatever, are still not fast enough to respond to it and to be able to mobilize quickly enough and effectively enough to address a major event like that. I keep on saying the 2003 power outage on the North Coast, on the East Coast, it took 24 minutes from initial ping to black. And are we as a nation, as a globe, are we prepared to respond that quickly in a 24-minute environment?
So 1 minute. So quickly, I think what keeps me up at night is just this idea that we could lose this really wonderful thing that we've created. This global communication system, the internet is. The innovation that we're seeing in the IoT space and other areas, it's so exciting. AI, other advancements of where we can go. But the security threat is real, and we really need to face it so that we don't lose this great thing that we've developed. And so I think at Commerce, what we've really tried to focus on is how can we find ways to bring the right parties together where we can make progress, not boil the ocean, but pick areas where the partners are willing to work together to come up with some small areas, best practices where we can make progress, and try to make the changes incrementally so that we can keep the innovation going, but try to address these very serious problems.
I would say my answer is kind of a combination of the previous ones. The biggest concern I have is the increasing dependence of the critical services and functions that our country has come to depend upon, and the knowledge of a threat actor that disrupting those would cause significant chaos in our country, and then sort of combined with that we wouldn't necessarily even know that it's happening until we were significantly down the road to whatever sort of might be kind of that follow-up. And so that's why we've just been, to sort of Evelyn's point, is like, and because of that, we sort of, as various different countries, all decide that this global interconnected thing that our country led the development of, and it has now provided so much benefit to the world, it continues to provide benefit, we will make choices to start to dismantle that. And I don't believe that has to happen, but at the same time, we have to figure out how we can achieve that efficiency and that innovation and everything that has been so wonderful about that technological development, while also preserving the ability to ensure we have clean water, secure financial system, electricity, all of those things. So that's what I would kind of say that as a combination of the last ones.
And mine, I guess, is pretty similar to Evelyn's. It's that the fundamental infrastructure of the internet didn't have enough security baked in on the front end, and that it's getting too difficult to add it in on the back end. And I guess I'd add that, by focusing on particular threat actors all the time, so Russia or China or others, we again aren't thinking forward to what the next great actor will be. I mean, a year and a half ago, people would never have sat in a room like this and thought that Russia would be the number one thing on people's mind. Let's be thinking about what will be on people's mind in 18 months. And so when we're thinking about security, we can't just think about how we want to secure it today, but with AI and these other technologies and the changing threat landscape, where do we need to go from there?
Okay, audience questions. We got one here in the front row already. You got a microphone coming your way. Wait 1 second.
For Evelyn, regarding patching IoT, I was at a meeting a while ago where automotive manufacturers were talking about pushing patches to cars overnight. So you could come down to your car in the morning and maybe it's been bricked, or maybe the user interface looks different, or maybe the performance is different. The question is, were the automotive manufacturers in the room when you were dealing with stakeholders? Because that's the internet of really big things, where that can be life-threatening things. I don't care if my washing machine spin cycle is updated by the manufacturer, but I'm more concerned about what Honda does to my Honda that I might not know about in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. So yes, at NTIA, we have actually worked very, very hard to get the cross-sector community into the room on our multi-stakeholder processes. And we have had nice engagement from the auto industry, the health industry, all of these sectors that are looking at these not just security issues, but for them, they can be safety issues. And so they have wanted to be at the table in these IoT security discussions, having those discussions. And a nice thing has been that we have had our government partners at the table too, from some of the agencies that are having to look at this issue too, because everyone is seeing how important harmonization is going to be as well. That if we just end up with a patchwork of regulations, that is not going to give us the environment that we need. So yes, so we had those voices in the room, both in our patching multi-stakeholder work and the one that we did on vulnerability disclosure as well. And so we hope that those players will continue to participate with us.
Another question, second row here, over here. And by the way, this is not at all a subtweet to what you just did. That was a good, concise question. But because we're running short on time, I just want to make sure everybody knows that try to keep the questions as short as possible.
This is working. Is this working? I was wondering how effective people think the government has been at using its own purchasing power to elevate the standards that have become just kind of a general availability. Really short question.
I think that we haven't fully leveraged that. That's been a large focus of ours, is thinking about not just the purchasing power, but also procurement policy and the contracts that we write. At DHS, we took some actions to require cybersecurity incident reporting is put in all of our contracts. We're looking to do that government-wide, but it's sort of there's a lot more that could be done, and from everything from supply chain to ensuring that we're purchasing those and putting requirements on vendors that we want to see sort of broadly in industry.
I'll pile on as the responder to many, many government RFPs. They're becoming increasingly effective.
There's even a bill in Congress to do this on IoT specifically. I didn't know if anybody had any particular thoughts on that legislation. No? Okay, we'll go to the next question in the audience, and back here, standing up.
We're at the threshold of quantum computing and artificial intelligence into the net. Do they offer more hope or doom for internet security?
So I'll just quickly talk about that because, that's an investment area for a lot of companies. And I think that there's both sides of that coin, right? There is, you can't stop progress, right? That's just not a thing that we can or should do. And there is incredible promise and hope, particularly in the AI space, to actually improve security. The ability to actually make sure, for example, that your identity access management, this is how we're leveraging it clients today, is actually going, faster, more efficiently to the right people in the right role at the right time so that you're not actually permeating access across your entire network. It's a great application for the use of AI and some leveraging of making that a more efficient, more effective, more accurate process for companies. On the flip side, of course, there is that concern that we're somebody to actually use that capability to find a faster and more efficient way to attack you or to intersect that process, right? So we have to, the concept of build it securely from the beginning has to be in every aspect of a new capability. On the quantum computing side, I think that, that is a real arms race around encryption and what it means as an important layer of security for all of what we do. So I'll be interested to see. I hope it ends in the right place, but I think that's something that we have to make sure that forums like this continue to address because it's not an if, it's a when, and we need to make sure that we're doing the things that everybody on this panel talked about beforehand.
Yeah, and I'd just add one specific point on the AI front, which is there's the possibility that as we go further down the pipeline, we won't actually know how the AI is making particular decisions, and that has the opportunity to build in a lot of biases into the decision process. So going back to the earlier point about transparency, we need to understand why the AI is deciding to do something, especially in the security space, because we're not far off from a space in which offensive and defensive weapons will be controlled in the short term and automated decision making. And if we don't understand why they're picking one thing over the other, it does lead for opportunities for bias to be built into the process.
I agree with all that. The only additional thing I would add is, I've huge proponents of more automation for cybersecurity to ensure that the analysts can focus on the things that analysts should focus on, let the computers do the stuff they're good at. But yes, it introduces a lot of challenges. We've had a lot of success inside DHS in applying machine learning technologies to just thinking about in learning from the sensing data and everything that we have from federal governments, and so we see a lot of promise in that area. But yes, you have to proceed cautiously, and in the quantum computing and high performance computing in general, the United States has been a leader in this area, and I believe that we need to continue to maintain that leadership. And it's just not just from a cybersecurity perspective, but from so many capabilities. We need to continue to invest and lead in that area, as cybersecurity being one among many beneficiaries of that.
All right, got another front row question? I think we have time for two more here, so.
Sure, thank you. Just curious if any of you have thoughts on the focus. A lot of the talk today is on advanced threats. We just talked about quantum computing and AI. We've been talking about botnets, but everyone's organization is still much more likely to be affected by phishing and social engineering and basic attacks, right? Even from APTs. They don't always use the most sophisticated malware in the world. Just curious for your thoughts on how much focus you think we should put on these really advanced attacks when the basics still get everybody every day.
Yeah, There's a lot with that. I think absolutely. One of the things we talk about a decent amount, which I would like to see more people talk about, is raising the costs for the adversary, deterrence by denial. There's a lot of different phrases you can use, but we're making it too easy. Advanced persistent threats don't have to be particularly advanced most of the time, and when you talk about raising the costs, that can be putting people in jail and sort of traditional deterrence, but it can also mean forcing them to use their more advanced capabilities versus just, we know this vulnerability is prevalent because people continue to not patch these critical vulnerabilities. We know that phishing is still an easy way to get into somebody's network. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to address that. There are increasing technologies that can counter some of those that we want to continue to look at putting in place. But a lot of it comes down to that in the end, security usually is in the hands of the user. And they're not particularly incentivized to make security conscious decisions. We make it harder and harder for passwords. I barely remember my 12 different 13 alphanumeric character passwords that I have to remember, and I can't expect an average user to do that. The people still click through the certificate warnings. We're making all of these progress, but in the end, we still have sort of an opt-in security model, and people have to make the proactive choice to think about what they're doing, to make that decision to patch, or whether it's their personal computer or enterprise, that is usually, again, not the highest priority. So I think there has to be, worked on around whether it's identity, thinking differently about identities, or just generally how we think about the user and their role, because if they're going to always be our weakest link, the way that the system is right now. So how do we change that model? Maybe.
Can we pull on a thread there on the identity thing? Because I do think people need to stop authenticating themselves based on what they know. Right, that's not you can't protect this really insecure capability that we have that's distributed around the world, that's highly resilient and always available, and think that you're going to be secure by authenticating yourself based on a what you know thing. I think that most people would say that ship has sailed. We really need to think about what is an acceptable use of biometrics, since that seems to be everybody's willing to touch their phone again, right? So that's the direction we need to be going in. And it is going to take a partnership between private sector and federal and state government to actually get there. But we need to actually go in that direction.
Okay, I think we have one more microphone out in the crowd, and that will probably be the very last question. If we can, yeah.
This would be an age-old question, IPv6. And we talk about IPv6 for decades. Now all of a sudden everybody talking about IoT just for the past few years. Now my question for the panel is, do you really think we can adopt IoT worldwide without fully adoption of IPv6 globally? Thank you.
So I'll just say, since we're focused on security here, is that I do think IPv6 is going to be an important element of being able to secure the IoT space. I mean, we're looking, that's also part of the promise of a 5G environment, is kind of moving away from natting. And being able to have more innovation and security advancement that is focused, that is helped along by the use of IPv6. I think, we at the Commerce Department, this is something that IPv6 adoption that we've been promoting for some time. It was, again, reiterated in our IoT Green Paper that we published back in January. Just how important it is. We do recognize that there are certain market marketplace realities that have been holding back the deployment in some cases. But we do think as we're moving towards an IoT, 5G, advanced environment where we need to, as we've said a few times here, be building in security from the design stage, that IPv6 is going to be a very important part of that.
Okay, that'll wrap it up. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience.